Let's talk about commas and periods. They are the most used pieces of punctuation in an essay, and they're also often the most misused pieces of punctuation in an essay. So, this video is going to kind of clarify when you should and should not be using these two types of punctuation. Sometimes when I read a student's essay, I want to ask them, why did you put that comma in your paper? And sometimes when they tell me things like, it looked like it needed one. It looked like it needed one should never be the reason that you put a comma in your paper. Today, we're going to go over 5 very specific rules to help you determine whether or not your paper needs a comma. And it's very important that you know whether or not to use that comma, because what happens a lot of times is when students start putting commas in their paper because it looked like it needed one, they end up creating a comma splice, which is a fused sentence. And this is very deadly to your grade in an English 1301 class. And you see here on your screen an example of a comma splice. I have 2 sentences. That comma that you see between the word stone and the word his, that needs to be a period. That is an incorrectly used comma that has created a fused sentence that's going to cost me a lot of points on my grade. So let's talk about how to identify them, how to use them correctly. Think about when you're driving a car. We all like to think that we're very good drivers. In fact, according to an Allstate commercial that I've seen, 96% of us think that we are a good driver. But think about these 2 signs that you see when you're driving. Most of the time, when you become frustrated with somebody else's driving, it happens at one of these 2 signs because people aren't doing the correct thing at these signs. And that's really what's going on in your essay. The yield sign that you see on the left of your screen, that's a comma. The stop sign that you see on the right side of your screen, that's a period. And so when you put a comma in your paper, you're telling me to yield. And if I needed to stop, that's causing a problem. Conversely, if you put a stop sign in your paper and really all I needed to do was yield, that's going to cause a problem as well. So when you put a comma in your paper, think about it as a yield sign. When you put a period in your paper, think about it as a stop sign. And a lot of times when students think about it that way, it helps make these mistakes go away. Okay, so let's talk about that yield sign. The yield sign means be prepared. Something important is about to happen. You could have to slow down to let somebody in. You could have to speed up to keep from being hit or to merge smoothly into the traffic. You may need to be prepared to stop because there's a bicycle or a crosswalk or something of that nature coming up. And so when you use a comma in your paper, you're letting the reader know that something is about to happen and he or she needs to be prepared to handle that situation. The stop sign on the other thing only means one thing. It doesn't mean slow down. It doesn't mean speed up. It doesn't mean be prepared to stop. It means stop. And so when you use a period in your paper, the reader needs to stop. Failure to put a period in the correct place results in a fused sentence, and I have a video on fused sentences if you'd like to check that out. And again, you see our example here. There needs to be a period between the word stone and the word his. Everything in front of the word stone is one sentence. Everything after the word his is a second sentence. The comma doesn't fix it because that tells me to slow down, and I don't need to slow down. I need to stop. Okay, so don't forget to use the period, but remember, you can't replace a comma with a period. Those are 2 different pieces of punctuation. What would happen tonight if I went out around Dallas, took down every stop sign and put up a yield sign, and took down every yield sign and put up a stop sign? Going to work tomorrow might get a little bit interesting for you. So let's talk about when to use a comma. Use a comma before a coordinating conjunction when combining 2 sentences into one. And this is the sentence we've been working with all through the video. Okay, it's a comma splice if I just put a comma in between the word stone and the word his. But if I add a coordinating conjunction behind that comma, now I have a good sentence. And we've got 7 words that we can work with here: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Make sure you choose the right conjunction. You may want to try 1 or 2 of them out, see which one works best. But don't forget, you need a comma and you need the coordinating conjunction. Once you have that, you no longer need a period in this location. You can also use you have to use a comma after a dependent clause when it starts a sentence. You may want to Google the word subordinating conjunctions. I've got a couple of them listed down there at the bottom of your screen. But anytime you start a sentence with a subordinating conjunction, you're going to need a comma somewhere in that sentence. Um, The comma separates the subordinating clause, which you see underlined in our two examples, from the independent clause. I will go to work is a sentence. It doesn't need any help. But if all I say to you is after class, you're not going to be sure what to do next. And that's what a dependent clause is. And so, what I recommend to students, if you're having trouble figuring out where a comma goes in a sentence that starts with a subordinating conjunction, find the sentence. Whatever comes before the sentence is your subordinating conjunction or your subordinating clause, your dependent clause. Put a comma in between that word in the beginning of your real sentence, and you should be good to go. The third rule we want to talk about here, we're going to talk about very briefly because you've known this rule since like second or third grade when you started writing. We use commas to offset items in a series. My favorite colors are red, comma, black, comma, and gray. The question becomes that comma that I have there after the word black. This is the controversial Oxford. Some people call it the Harvard comma. We can't even agree about what to call it. That's how controversial it is. Some teachers insist that you use it. Some teachers say that it's okay for you to leave it out. And that's kind of what you see here in these next two example sentences. In one, I have the comma after the word snake. In the other one, I don't. Both of these ways are technically correct, but you do want to take a minute before you decide to leave this comma out or to put this comma in. The Oxford or the Harvard, whatever way you want to call it, does help reduce possible confusion in your writing. And you see a very popular meme here. How many people are in this sentence? And you notice if I put the comma in, there are 4 different people in this sentence. But if I take the comma out, it appears that there's only 2 of them, and JFK and Stalin are the names of the people that are involved. And so there's a little bit of unclarity going on here. And if you remember from another video that I have, clarity in writing is the fundamental rule. Whatever makes your writing more clear, that's what you need to be doing. The fourth rule that we want to talk about very quickly is anytime you have an adverb that begins your sentence, make sure you put a comma immediately after that adverb. Now, most of the time, adverbs end in ly, and so this is very easy to find. Anytime a sentence starts with a word that ends in ly, drop a comma after that ly word. There are some adverbs that don't follow this ly rule, so you may want to Google adverbs and see which adverbs you like to start sentences with, and just be aware that you're going to need a comma after them. The other things that you'll need to know, always get a comma if they're the first word in the sentence, are the words yes and no. The fifth rule and final rule that we want to talk about here is how to use commas to offset non-essential information. You can see here that I have a sentence and I have underlined some non-essential information to this sentence. I can take this information out of my sentence and I still have a sentence that has meaning. And anytime you can do that, we want to put commas on both sides of that non-essential information. That's just the correct way to punctuate those sentences. So how do you know if the information you have is non-essential? Very easily. Take those words out. If you still have a sentence that means pretty much the same thing as the one you just had, now we're going to put commas on both sides of those information. Another way to tell if the information is non-essential is to take those words and put them somewhere else in the sentence. If the sentence still retains the same meaning, it's probably non-essential information. And so number one works best for me. But if you're having troubles with number one, there is a second way to try to solve these issues there. The big takeaway that I want you to get from this video is to know that commas and periods are not interchangeable pieces of punctuation. We use a comma when something important is about to happen. We use a period when the reader needs to stop. Okay. Know why you put a comma in your paper. Don't put a comma in your paper because it looked like it needed one. Say, I put a comma in this paper because it followed rule number 3. I put a comma in this paper because it followed rule number 4. Okay. Give yourself a reason. If you can't give yourself a reason, don't put a comma in the paper. That said, it's not an exhaustive list of comma rules. We didn't even talk about the comma that goes between city and state and some of the other basic rules that you've probably known a long time. We really just focused on how to tell where a comma goes in most of your sentences. If you have any questions about comma use, feel free to send me an email at the address you see there on your screen or come by my office during the office hours listed on your syllabus. You can also stop by our library and get help from our awesome tutors down there. And if you just prefer online learning, like I've said in all these other videos, Purdue has a great online learning system to deal with the English language, and you see the address there on your screen.